Hi, I'm Odessa Blaine, executive producer of the FW Leadership Series podcast. This season, we're doing something a little different, putting your leadership questions to Helen at the end of each episode. It's a chance to ask Helen what's on your mind, your workplace dilemmas, conundrums, or pet hates. We love voice notes, or you can send us your written questions at hello@futurewomen.com. We'll put the link in the show notes. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Helen McCabe, Managing Director and founder of FW. I began life as a journalist, held senior roles in newspapers, edited Australia's largest magazine, and in 2018, I launched my own business. FW is dedicated to helping women navigate their working lives. But I've made my share of mistakes, especially as a leader. In this series, I go in search of answers to often complex leadership challenges. I explore the latest thinking on how to be a great leader and return to the tried and true methods to better understand what works and in what situations. I'm excited to introduce the first guest of this new season. Michael Diath started his career as a teacher and went on to become one of the country's most accomplished public servants. His last role was as the Director General of Queensland's Department of Education. Today, he runs a leadership advisory and executive coaching business. Listening to this episode, you'll get a sense of why his expertise is so highly sought after. In it, we talk about courage, executive presence, and why people think about succession planning all wrong. Michael, welcome to the FW Leadership Series podcast. There's quite a bit I want to get through with you today, but I thought a good place to start, given that you've had a long career in the public service, you've been in consultancy, you're back in consultancy, is perhaps tell us a little bit about how you first came to leadership and when was sort of like the first time that you realized that actually you are a leader.
Yeah, it goes a long way back, Helen. I think when I was in sort of my upper primary school years, and one of the units you do is, a mock disaster. And I was a disaster controller. And I sort of wonder sometimes what's changed. And, but really, I think, when you go into a teaching career, I always say, whether you teach forever or not, teacher training is good.
Mm.
And I was really fortunate to work with some terrific people who really guided me. And I went into, leadership and management work very young, made lots of mistakes, studied hard, studied for 20 years actually while I was working full time. And a lot of that study around psychology, organizational psychology, leadership, and the discipline. Yeah. And so that's really sort of how I landed into it.
So it's interesting because you were obviously had the natural elements or the natural qualities of a leader from as a kid, and you went with that into teaching. But you're quick to say there that you made a lot of mistakes, and I'm always a bit intrigued by the person who is the natural leader and gets the job and then makes a mess of it, because it's a pretty common path. Do you recognize yourself in that description?
Oh, look, I think we all as leaders look back on things and go, gee, I could have done that better. And if we don't do that, if we're not reflective like that, or what sort of leaders really are we? Because I think that's how you get better. It's observing people and observing them deeply, not just going, gosh, I really admire that person. It's part of the work I do in my coaching work is, yeah, you might like that person, admire them, but why? What are the characteristics that you're really noticing, and how might you modify your behavior, as a result of what you're observing, and then practice that. So I think leadership is developed over time, and it is a practice, and a really reflective practice.
Tell me, we're in 2026. Leadership has gone through lots of different fads of, words and buzz phrases and styles of leadership. What are you seeing now, and what do you regard as a good leader in 2026?
I have a picture that hangs on the wall, is hanging on the wall in my offices for many years, and it's the picture of the reenactment of Rosa Parks on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And there's a reason why I have that picture, because it's something that I think that hasn't changed about leadership, and leadership is about courage. And if you think about what it was like for Rosa Parks on that day to take a stand, hold the line, something that was fundamentally important to her and the civil rights movement, and to say, well, this is wrong and I'm not going to do this today. And one of the reasons why I love that photo and I look at it is because it reminds me when I'm having a hard day on courage, it can be nothing like what it was like for her that day. So I think one of the constants is courage. There's lots of things, you're there to do something. So if you're going to do something, you've got to have the courage and the conviction to do it. And I know those people who I've, encountered throughout my career who are a bit yes minister. And I just don't think that's what we're there to do. We're there to actually really stand for something.
Michael, I want to talk a bit more then about the challenges of demonstrating courage in contemporary organizations. If you're in an organization that really doesn't want courage, it just wants you to do your job, do it well, and not rock the boat. What do you say to anyone listening that is in one of those organizations? And it can be in the public or private sector today.
Helen, we talked about, mistakes along the way. And in line with what you're asking about here, I mean, one of the mistakes I made at a point in my career was I stayed somewhere too long where the leadership was absolutely not conducive towards how I think and how I think we should progress, and certainly was not encouraging of anyone to put their head up too high, completely risk averse. And when I'm working with people who are thinking about their next career move, I really encourage them, like, you recognize this, and then there could be a 12-month runway if you're lucky before you need to go. And so you have to start work on it early. And you actually need to think about how you can be at your optimal performance. And if the environment's not conducive to that, then you shouldn't stay.
All right, that's good advice. But okay, I'm working in a big organization and I'm unclear what you mean by courage. Like when you say I want to see courage in your leadership of a team in a big organization, what does that actually mean, do you think?
So if you observe people and you observe people deeply, the people you admire, you'll see how they do that. They're often patient. They work quietly away at influencing. They pick their moments. They have very good judgment. And I know that's hard to work with people on, but if if you're working with people about how do you conduct yourself in a meeting, how do you conduct yourself in a meeting if it's with superiors as opposed to the team you're leading? Like, what are you trying to achieve? What are your objectives? What's your demeanor? What's your executive presence? What is executive presence anyway? And what does it look like? And of course, something that's hugely contextual. So I think there's a real science around leadership and that notion of courage and demonstrating it and how it plays out. And if you don't think about it deeply, or even if you're not like trained in it, and you're just sort of flying by the seat of your pants, then it probably will unravel on you. I think when I look at so many leaders that are really successful now, like it's like talented musicians. They didn't just pick up a guitar, bang out a song, and now they're famous. It all happened through a lot of hard work generally, and really thinking deeply about it and tweaking it and playing around the edges and trying different things. So yeah, I think courage is something to be managed carefully, and to be understood into context you're working within and what you want to achieve and how you want to influence.
So I feel like that was a bit of a trick question in some ways because you're an ex-public servant, right? So your version of courage is going to be considered and thoughtful and moment by moment. But what about the courage that you see in a leader that says what will be unpopular, says we're seeing a lot of courage in both a negative and a positive sense at the moment in Canberra, where people are saying things that couldn't have been said before, that are offensive to some people and important to others. How do you manage, and what's your view of that kind of courage?
Politicians, if you look at just that sphere, are motivated by a range of interesting factors. And certainly from a senior public servant perspective, you have to really have some attempt to understand what that world is that they're trying to operate in and how they're trying to obtain something that is often quite morally good and right, but it's very incremental and it has trade-offs all over the place. So I think, when you're working for those people, you have to have some understanding of that. But I think that at the end of the day, if you've got some conviction, if you believe strongly in something and you've got a good argument around that, it's not just something that you're flying off the top of your head, then you should stand up and you should be counted. This is a democracy, and some people are going to like that idea or that stance, and some people aren't. But what are you really there for if you don't stand for something?
And I guess you're thinking around the importance of courage as a core, if not the core, leadership skills is as much about what the people that are under you feel in terms of the following someone who's prepared to put their neck out, take a stand, go against common public opinion or go against public opinion. Can you talk a little bit about how courage flows through an organization?
Yeah, because it's not just about public opinion, it's, like deeply in within your organization. So if you think of, a role I recently left as Director General of Education in Queensland, that is a direct employer of nearly 100,000 people. So what you do as the leader permeates that organization, whether you like it or not. And you should be deeply aware of that. And so there were things in senior leadership that I didn't tolerate and would never tolerate, and those people don't remain. And there are things like discrimination, misogyny, poor behavior towards others. Those things just rot deeply into organizations. And so that's on the sort of the people leadership side. And then you're there to bring some strategy to the place and some plan. What is the plan? And I found myself working in organizations where I think there was a lack of direction, that it's really important that a leader works with others to bring some direction, to bring some clarity, to bring some coherence to the place, so that people have a purpose. Otherwise, people are just running around trying to work it out and make it up. I worked for a secretary for education in New Zealand called Howard Fancy, and Howard was an economist. I found him quite boring. I deeply respected him, but I found him quite boring. And then one day I sort of thought about, why is it that I just find Howard so incredibly boring? And it was because, and he served for a long time, he always said the same thing. And the interesting thing about that was that in that organization, we were all clear about what the organization was about. Love it or hate it, that Howard was speaking it, and he said over and over and over again. And I learned something from that, is that sometimes you have to be boring, like
Yep.
you have to actually be really consistent about the message and give people that security that we are going somewhere. This is what it is, and let's just remember that all the time.
I think that's such great advice. And I think it's, a really good advice to anyone leading a new business, because you can be knocked around all the time by a new idea and a new opportunity, and that can be extremely confusing. I want to talk a little bit more about the work you're now doing. You've had an enormous career, and as I said, you've been a lifelong learner when it comes to leadership. You stumbled into it a bit, Michael, although you can correct me if I'm wrong. You stumbled into it a bit, this idea of coaching others into being better leaders. Talk to me a little bit about how it came about.
One of the things that I always enjoyed about leading was working with my leadership team. And I always felt that a big part of that job was helping people with how to think about something. And so one of the things that I have always loved about leadership is, getting in a room, solving a problem, working out a plan, thinking about where we're going to go, charting the direction, and in a really collaborative way where people sort of owned that. I learned as a very young teacher that, when I was doing some team teaching work, is that if you have an idea and you take that idea into a space with others, that idea is only ever strengthened. It's a really important thing to remember that we are not the font of all knowledge, and we are not the masters and mistresses of every destiny. So, and then when I started working with people, and I had the time to listen, and that is a huge privilege, to have the time to listen. I would have liked to have think, as a leader of large organizations, I was a good listener, but you really are pressed for time a lot of the time to really deeply listen. And when you listen to people, you soon learn where the opportunities are for them and with them. And then you just start working. So I always have a bit of a plan in my mind of some of the things that I think are important about helping grow others. But it shapes differently for every person. And I think that, choosing someone to work with is a deeply personal thing. It's almost like choosing your GP, and there'll be a range of factors in people's minds about who that is and why that is. And that should always remain a personal choice.
All right. So talk to me a little bit about how you go about working with someone to improve their executive presence or their leadership opportunities or their prospect of being promoted.
Oh, this could be for sale, Helen.
Well, it could be, yes. I'm asking for a friend.
Seriously, it's a good question, and there are some really important things that I think folks. I've talked about the importance of listening and trying to understand where someone's at.
Mm.
And that looking at the context that they're working in, who are they working for? Who are their superiors? What's that like? What's their team like? What's happening with their team? Talked earlier about what's your conduct and presence in different meetings. They're all different, right? If you're meeting with a minister, that's very different to meeting with your own team where you're the leader. So how are you playing that? People will talk to me about how they've got a meeting coming up with like the head of the department or the head of the public service or something. And to okay, so what's that meeting all about? And how are you going to be? And, is your boss there and why? And what does that look like? So
Can I interrupt you there? Because I'm a bit intrigued by this. Why would I be different if I was meeting a minister versus meeting a member of my team? And is that really necessary? And again, I'm asking for a friend because I have a funny feeling that I'm not adjusting my own presence at all. And I'm not sure that I'm doing the right thing then.
I think it is different.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, I think it is different. And I keep saying it's contextual. If you take ministers, for example, they're all different. Some of them want to get in there and mix it up and have a good sort of we're all mates conversation. Others are really hierarchical. So immediately you're moving between I'm sitting here, I'm listening, I'm being seen to be absorbing, I'm thinking critically about what you're saying, I'm thinking really carefully and measured about what my next words are. I'm not particularly relaxed. We're all a bit on guard. There might be tension. That is different to sitting there talking with someone who wants to work something through with you.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, if you're working with your boss, well, what's your boss like? You might have a really great boss who really, you feel really relaxed around, but you might have a boss who just seems constantly tense under pressure and so on. So I think we are always adjusting ourselves, and I think that's okay. I mean, I think that is part of the art of leading at all levels is that you get the context.
So you really try to get underneath what the context is and what the environment is that somebody's working in before you can offer any real thoughtful assistance.
I think you're doing someone a real disservice if you're not. If you're just going in with a pre-planned agenda about how someone should behave and operate, then that could get them into a lot of trouble. And particularly when you've been a CEO, and I find that a lot of people are very focused on kind of the technical aspects of the job. People naturally want to do a great job. Like that's human nature, right? So they're often not going in there thinking about what's the boss's day like today? What's the minister's day like today? What's their mood? What's their temperament? What are they trying to achieve? And how can I help them achieve it? And how do I kind of let all my lovely important priorities go over here and just try and understand where they're at and what needs to happen today? And it's the same with doing work with people around interview techniques. I have interviewed so many people in my career, and I've been interviewed so many times. And as a CEO, often interviewing people, I just despair often at the fact that they just hadn't projected themselves into the space of who they were working for and what was needing to be achieved. They were very focused on what that job description said, and it's very misleading often.
A slight segue on that too. There's a definite movement around the individual, right? The employer or the boss has to be the right person for them, that it's their values and their alignment that is important, versus, as you say, giving the impression, if not the reality, that you're actually wanting to be part of a team to make the boss's life happier or easier, versus the values alignment or the individual needs of the person who's going for the job. And I think that's something that is a contemporary challenge for particularly young people going to work, because I think they get a lot of poor advice on that. And that's probably what you've seen.
And we've got to stop this over formality of interview processes anyway. I mean, it has a place, right? But, it's such a driven traditional sort of process. I was talking to someone the other day who was telling me about how his son had just gone for an interview to teach in an independent school, and got there, and the principal said, "Well, let's just go for a walk," and they just walked around the school chatting, and I thought that's brilliant, you know.
But Michael, I want to go to something you and I have talked privately about, and that is your mentoring and training of women, particularly. You've been involved with me on how we assist men in the workplace, but I'm interested in what you're saying when you're talking to women directly. And from the perspective, before you are cautious on answering this question, from the perspective of a female listenership who are listening to this podcast to get better at leadership and get better at managing difficult workplace situations. What are you seeing at the moment?
Something I've noticed for quite a while, but I'm noticing much more deeply through working more deeply with people. And some of the women that I've got the privilege of working with are sort of typical of some of that research and evidence for whatever has driven that to be, that they have immense loyalty. These are the people who are saying, I must complete this thing. I must do these things, and I need to endure some of these behaviors along the way that may not be so great. And working through that is, look, it's just an absolute privilege to let people talk about what this means to them, and then to follow some sort of lines of ways of operating or ways of thinking about things a little bit differently. Who you really want to work for, why, how important is that task? Thinking about succession. You know, people generally think about succession as, you know, who's going to do my job. But succession is actually a lot about you as well. And people don't like to think selfishly about themselves. And that's how they perceive it when they're thinking about something, a perspective I put to people about succession, which is from a CEO's perspective, when I'm looking for someone to do a piece of work, someone's just left over here and I go, oh gosh, it'd be great if I could get X person. Oh, there's no one kind of behind them. That's just going to create another problem. So succession has a number of angles to it. One of those is, and this is a really important thing I find with some of the women I work with is, you know, build the succession behind you for multiple reasons. Might not even be in your team. Start looking wider. You know, who are the people, who are the high potential people that you could support to shadow you, spend a bit of time, act when you're away, you know, so that at some point in time when there's the opportunity for you, somebody goes, yeah, that's good, but you know, so and so created this person over here who could probably fill that space. So it's really just shifting the thinking a lot of the time into, you know, a sort of a level of confidence about why you're doing what you're doing and how you can bash through the glass ceiling a bit and make some progress and make a contribution. Because these people are great. They're not just good, they're great. And I've watched people jump from fourth tier roles into, you know, junior CEO roles. Like amazing. But they're that good. They are that good.
I'm just going to ask you some quickfire FW leadership questions in the hope that our listeners can pick up some small practical tips from you. What's the best piece of feedback you've received in your career?
Look, it felt a bit negative and it really, really threw me. And when one of my bosses said to me, you know, like you need to remember that, you know, you can be 10 paces ahead of someone and you need to let everyone else catch up. And I was so damaged by that. It was sort of about humility and, you know, which is a really strong value for me. And I thought, am I that bad? And, you know, yeah, I probably was. And I was younger then. And I think I was probably lucky I got told that then, you know, learned from that and modified. If you can't modify your behavior, you shouldn't be in there doing this stuff. So that was probably a pretty harsh one.
How long did it take you to process that?
Oh, months, months, you know, gosh, you know, a lot of leaders are very shy, I think, actually quite high humility, very sensitive. We know the ones who aren't, you know, like you see it, but maybe that's just driven by some insecurity. So, you know, we take things really hard because we've all been pretty successful in one way or another to have got there. and then somebody tells you something negative and you just like die inside. And I just say to people, you get knocked down, you get back up again. And it's not gonna be easy, but if you learn something from it, you'll be better. You'll be much better, actually.
You and I have talked a lot about ego too in leadership and recognizing when it kind of kicks in and when your reactions are based on an ego response versus, a clear-eyed response. Do you come across that in your training much? Because I raise it because I've done a little bit of mentoring myself, and I can see an ego a long way out that is holding someone back, and you're just like, oh, how do you have that conversation that this is really about ego? This is not really going to make you happy, and it's really not what you're good at.
Well, I left my CEO role and I was thinking about what to do. And I actually just went and met with a whole lot of people. No real agenda. I hadn't even started the firm at that stage. And I just was listening to people, just some people I knew, some people I didn't know very well. I searched way back from people I'd worked with a long time ago who I thought were quite good, and just went around the country, actually, meeting with a whole lot of people. And, in a lot of cases these are people with high humility and so on. But there were some who I thought, even if the opportunity came to work with you, I don't know, I could work with you because there's something in the way for you, and that is that, and quite frankly, you think you know it all, and I know you don't, and that's going to be really hard for you. You might get quite up the rungs, but somewhere along the line, you're going to have a pretty big fall, and I don't know the hands are going to be there to catch you as you come down.
Any career regrets?
Oh, well, I'm a strong positive, as I've said. I like sort of hugely privileged. I've been very lucky. There was one time though where I left a job, and I left a job, an important job, and I left it too long to make that decision, and I left quite quickly, and I left because of the leadership. And I look back on that, and I think, actually that was hard on people. I mean, it was hard on me, but it was actually hard on a lot of people, that you kind of disappear on them. And there's always some sort of story wrapped around it, which all sounds very plausible. But that would be my regret, is I wish I could have managed that a bit better and timed that a bit better and played that a bit better. And that's why I think it's really important to work with people who are looking for career coaching, is like, think about that runway.
And just to give you a supplementary question on that, if someone's listening to this and is like, okay, I hear him, I should think about moving on. What's your recommendation of how to execute that so that you don't sort of look back in 10 years' time and go, whoa, I ripped that Band-Aid off a little too quickly and left a bit of a train wreck behind?
This isn't a promo for the business, but it's really important to, I think, get advice. And so many of us have been guided so well, who have ended up in senior positions, and people are willing to share and talk with you about their experiences and how for you to think about your next experience and what's good for you. And there's so many tragic stories out there at the moment about people who've just ended up in positions in a context that is really damaging them. I'm looking at a situation in my own family at the moment. I think, gosh, this is just so wrong. Maternity leave should not lead to this sort of destruction. So how do you support people to get out of that? Because your head gets a bit foggy in those situations, and if you can find your own way through it and sort it out, great, all the best. But I don't think many of us are actually that good at doing that completely independently.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's
Mm.
absolutely right. Having done it a few times and then helped people through it, it's really clear when you're working closely with someone what the next steps are, but they really do need guidance. Just you need to sort of hold both hands in a way, because once emotion kicks in, once ego kicks in, once reputation kicks in, then fear, about what's next.
Yep.
It can go wrong very quickly. The one question that I ask everybody who is on this podcast is, what sort of leader are you?
What sort of leader am I now? It's sort of interesting because this has been like, for me, this has been a big transition. And one of the things I love about the leadership now is that it's quietly from behind. It has a calmness about it. It's helping.
To follow that up by asking, what sort of leader were you then?
Decisive. I was very decisive, pretty action orientated. Get to the metrics quickly, understand what's going on, look at the culture, a lot of analytics. and then move in a way that, having learnt that lesson many years earlier, bring as many people into the thinking and the ownership of the thinking as you can, and find a way forward together. Build great teams. I acted quickly in organizations to make sure the team was right. And I mentioned some of those behaviors that just were completely unacceptable to me. I remember saying to a person who was leading all the regional arms of a particular organization, saying, look, this is, there are X number of these people, about 70, 80% were men. This is a largely female-dominated, profession. Where are the women who are leading in the space and appointing these roles? And the response to me was, well, the girls just don't seem to apply. And, well, that was it.
Yeah.
I just can't work with someone like that. So being really decisive and clear about your values and what's important to you and moving swiftly, that's not what I'm doing now. I don't need to operate in that way.
What did you say to that guy? What was the next steps after that? Because I'm asking for a friend, like someone gives you that kind of answer. What's the next steps?
Look, judgment is everything, right? And I remember that moment very well. I think my jaw literally dropped open. I don't think it was recognized by the person in front of me, because anyone who says that really isn't self-aware enough about what they've really said. And I just thought, well, in a really senior leadership role, there is no hope there. There is no time to try and correct that. That'll be deeply within the organization. Actually, I'd already got a sense about how people were feeling about this particular person and their behavior. And then I just went straight to the people I needed to go to about the contractual arrangements and what exit would look like, and then exited. Yeah, that's just a whole nother process.
Michael, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been amazing talking to you. Congratulations on the new business. Look forward to continuing this conversation, but great to get some of your insights.
Thank you, Helen, and congratulations on the work of Future Women. It's terrific.
This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation. It was produced by Odessa Blaine, Susan Warby, and led by Paddy Andrews.